The morning of April 24th, 2024 began like any other in the quiet village of Khairsa, Uttar Pradesh. The sun's first light had barely touched the earth when villagers noticed something strange floating in the old pond near the temple. At first, they thought it was debris, but as they got closer, their hearts froze. A human body drifted in the still water, its hands and legs tied, a large stone bound to the stomach pulling it downward. The sight sent waves of terror through the peaceful village. No one knew then that this wasn't just a random murder. The real story had started 7 months earlier, miles away. Under the shadow of faith, thousands of devotees travel every year to Madhya Pradesh's sacred Bageshwar Dham, a place believed to bring peace, healing, and divine blessings. Chanting of mantras echoes in every corner and faith fills the air. But even in the holiest places, evil sometimes hides behind devotion. Among the hundreds of volunteers serving, there were a man and a woman who blended in perfectly with the crowd, humble, quiet, seemingly devoted. Their names were Poonam and Manoj. For 7 months they lived and worked at the Dham, serving food to devotees, folding hands before idols, and chanting prayers. Yet behind those innocent faces hid a secret soaked in blood. These two weren't seekers of peace. They were fugitives, running from a crime so brutal it shattered an entire family. For 14 long months they evaded the police, changing identities in cities, pretending to live a holy life while hiding from their sins. What could they have done so terrible that it forced them to flee into a temple disguised as saints? This is the story of the murder of Dinesh Awasthi, a man betrayed not by strangers but by those he trusted most, his own wife and brother. To understand how everything went so wrong, we must go back to that same date, April 24th, 2024, in Khairsa village. Dinesh Awasthi, a 45-year-old truck driver, lived a simple and hard-working life. Most of his days were spent on highways, driving across states to earn enough for his family. His wife Poonam stayed home, and his younger brother Manoj lived with them. To anyone outside, they looked like an ordinary, close-knit family. Dinesh often said that his world began and ended with his loved ones. But he didn't know. The people he called his world were slowly turning into his biggest nightmare. 2 days after that fateful night, on April 26th, the peace of the village was shattered. The body found floating in the pond was identified as Dinesh's. Panic spread like wildfire. People couldn't believe that a man as gentle and humble as him could have enemies. His younger brother, Arshni Awasthi, immediately filed an FIR at the Bidnu police station. The police began their investigation, but there were no clues, no witnesses, and no suspects. It was as if the murderer had vanished into thin air. There were no ransom calls, no financial disputes, no history of fights. Dinesh had lived a simple life. Why would anyone want him dead? The mystery deepened, and frustration grew among the police officers. What they didn't know was that the killer wasn't hiding in the dark alleys of the city. The killer was inside Dinesh's home, mourning beside his body, pretending to be heartbroken, while quietly watching the chaos they had created. As the police dug deeper, cracks began to appear in the perfect picture of the Awasthi household. Neighbors started whispering about strange behavior. They remembered that Poonam and Manoj were often seen together. Too often. Dinesh's frequent absences had created a void in his home, and loneliness had slowly turned into temptation. The bond between Poonam and her brother-in-law crossed boundaries it never should have. Their secret relationship grew in the shadows, feeding on stolen moments and silent guilt. It was a sin that, once discovered, would destroy everything. The day Dinesh came home early from one of his trips, fate struck. He saw something no husband should ever see. His wife and his own brother, together in a way that ripped his heart apart. That night, the walls of the Awasthi home echoed with shouting, betrayal, and tears. For Dinesh, it wasn't just heartbreak, it was the ultimate betrayal, and stabbed not with a knife but with trust. His entire world crumbled in a single moment. Poonam and Manoj knew their secret was out. They feared humiliation, exposure, and punishment. Dinesh could destroy both their lives by morning. One word to the villagers and their affair would become the village's biggest scandal. And so, out of fear and desperation, they made a monstrous decision. If Dinesh was gone, their problem would be gone too. That night, while the village slept under the silent moon, Poonam and Manoj executed their plan. When Dinesh fell asleep, they attacked. Wooden sticks struck first, then knives followed. The man who once trusted them more than life itself was left lifeless on the floor, but the horror didn't end there. To erase every trace, they tied his hands and feet, wrapped a heavy stone around his stomach, and under the darkness of night dragged his body to the pond and threw it in. They believed they had buried their crime forever beneath the water's surface. But truth, like water, can never stay buried for long. It always finds a way to rise back to the surface. As dawn broke, the pond told its secret. The crime they thought would stay hidden forever was now floating for the whole village to see. The illusion of innocence began to crack, and Poonam and Manoj knew. Their time was running out. But where would they go? How do you hide from the law and from your own conscience? When the body of Dinesh Awasthi surfaced, Khairsa village plunged into fear and disbelief. The gentle truck driver everyone respected had met a brutal end. But who could hate him so much? That question echoed in every home, on every face. Even as the rituals of mourning filled the air, two people were pretending to grieve harder than anyone else, Poonam and Manoj. They cried loudly, helped with the funeral, and played their parts perfectly. But deep down, they knew the flames of the pyre were not just consuming Dinesh's body. They were also burning away the last remains of their peace. That night, after the cremation, Poonam and Manoj packed their bags. Fear wrapped around them like a shadow. They knew the police would soon start asking questions. Every knock on the door would feel like Judgment Day. Under the cover of darkness, they left the village. First to Lakhimpur, then to Sitapur, changing lodgings and names. The world they had known was gone, replaced by endless bus rides, sleepless nights, and whispers of guilt that refused to die down. They became ghosts in their own story, constantly looking over their shoulders, waiting for the sound of police sirens. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The police investigation moved slowly, like a puzzle missing its most crucial piece. The villagers whispered theories. Some said Dinesh had been killed for money. Others believed it was an old enmity. But no one suspected the real killers. Even Dinesh's brother Arshni, who had filed the FIR, never imagined that his other brother and sister-in-law were the monsters he was begging justice for. The betrayal was so deep, so unimaginable, that it lived just beyond the reach of logic. With time, public attention faded. Another tragedy, another headline. But the Kanpur police refused to give up. The case file stayed on the desk, a reminder that justice delayed was not justice denied. Investigators followed every clue, no matter how faint. Then, 7 months later, they received a whisper from the digital world. A trace, a flicker, a signal that would reignite the entire case. Meanwhile, Poonam and Manoj had found their perfect hiding place. They chose Bageshwar Dham, Madhya Pradesh, a place of devotion, crowds, and anonymity. Among thousands of devotees and hundreds of volunteers, it was easy to disappear. They let their hair grow, changed their clothes, and presented themselves as Sivaks, humble servants of faith. Every day they chanted prayers, served food, and touched the feet of saints. The same hands that had once held a knife now held offerings of flowers. To anyone watching, they looked peaceful, devoted, redeemed. No one could guess the kind of darkness that hid behind those folded hands. It was the perfect disguise. Crowds came and went, thousands of faces passed by, and the two murderers stood among them, breathing freely. For months, they lived a double life. Saints by day, sinners by night. They convinced themselves that God had forgiven them, that they could start over. But conscience is not so easily silenced. Every temple bell reminded them of the heartbeat they had silenced. Every prayer echoed like an accusation. Back in Uttar Pradesh, the police had placed both their phone numbers on surveillance mode. For months there was silence, no calls, no texts, no trace. But criminals always make one mistake, and when they do, it's enough. One evening, after 7 long months, a faint signal pinged on the system. Manoj had switched on his phone, maybe to contact someone, maybe to check the outside world. That one careless moment shattered their illusion of safety. The signal pointed to Chhatarpur, near Bageshwar Dham. In the police control room, the alert was immediate. A red dot flashed on the map. After months of dead ends, it was the first real lead. The call was made to senior officers, and within hours, Mission Bageshwar Dham was launched. A special team led by Deputy Superintendent of Police Ankita Sharma was formed. It was not a simple task. This was a massive religious place where thousands gathered daily. A single wrong move could cause chaos, so the operation had to be quiet, precise, and invisible. Working in close coordination with the Madhya Pradesh police, the team moved towards the Dham in plain clothes. The temple gates were busy as ever, filled with chants and music. The officers blended into the crowd, scanning faces carefully, holding printed photos of the fugitives that had now aged and changed. Time and fear had altered their features, but guilt has a way of showing itself. After hours of watching, the team spotted 2 volunteers whose eyes looked familiar. A woman serving food to devotees and a man arranging mats for prayers. When they smiled, the truth slipped through the cracks of their disguise. The officers observed quietly, confirming identities, waiting for the right moment. The evening prayers were about to begin when the signal came. As the crowd bowed their heads to chant Jai Shri Ram, plainclothes policemen moved silently through the gathering. In one swift motion, Poonam and Manoj were surrounded. Before they could react or shout, the officers revealed their identity. The two stood frozen, the sound of chants still echoing around them. In that holy place, their sins finally caught up with them. No mantra, no faith, no disguise could save them now. Their arrest created waves. Some devotees refused to believe that the gentle Sivacs they saw every day were killers. Others whispered that even the walls of a temple couldn't hide guilt forever. The police, careful not to cause panic, quietly escorted the two away. It was the end of their run. 7 months of hiding, 7 months of pretending, undone by a single phone signal. When the news reached Kyrsa, the village erupted. Shock, anger, disbelief, emotions collided like storm clouds. For Arshni, the brother who had begged for justice, the truth struck like lightning. The murderer of one brother was the other brother he had grown up with, played with, and trusted. The grief that followed wasn't just for the loss of Dinesh. It was for the death of faith in family itself. As the police prepared to take the fugitives back to Uttar Pradesh, reporters surrounded them, asking why they did it. Poonam's eyes stayed on the ground, silent and heavy with shame. Manoj tried to take all the blame, claiming that she was innocent. Perhaps it was love or guilt or both. But when the interrogation began, truth could no longer hide. One by one, the lies fell apart, and what the police heard in that room would shake even the hardest hearts. The night had fallen heavy over Udumbannoor, but the village couldn't sleep. Every streetlight flickered like it carried a secret. Every whisper carried the weight of suspicion. The police van stood still outside the small station, its headlights cutting through the misty darkness. Inside, on a worn wooden bench, sat the man everyone thought they knew. His clothes were soaked, his hands trembled, and his eyes stared blankly at the floor. After hours of silence, his lips finally parted, not to defend himself, but to let the truth crawl out like a ghost that refused to die. Inspector Suresh leaned forward, his tone calm but cold. "Tell me, Arun, why did you do it?" For a moment, the only sound in the room was the slow creak of the ceiling fan. Arun's throat tightened as he tried to speak. "I didn't mean to. It wasn't supposed to happen like that." His words cracked, and his voice fell apart into sobs. The officers exchanged glances. They had waited for this moment since the day the body surfaced from that deep pond. Now the story was finally about to unfold. Arun's confession began like a nightmare slowly coming to light. He told them about that night, the argument by the pond, the rising voices, and the moment everything spun out of control. He said her name softly, Anita. The love that once brought warmth had turned into something poisonous. What started as jealousy had grown into obsession, and when he found out she planned to leave, something inside him broke. "She said she couldn't do this anymore," he whispered. "She said she wanted to end everything, even us." The officers listened as Arun described how his anger took over. In a fit of rage, he grabbed her wrist to stop her from walking away. She struggled, slipped on the wet grass near the pond, and fell. He claimed he didn't push her, that it was an accident. But when her head hit a rock and she stopped moving, he froze. Panic devoured him. Instead of calling for help, he dragged her into the water, hoping the currents would hide what had just happened. But the pond, the silent witness, remembered everything. When he finished, the station was silent. The inspector took a deep breath and asked, "Why didn't you come forward after that night?" Arun's eyes turned hollow. "Because I thought I could bury it, just like I buried her. But every night I heard her voice. I saw her face. Even the pond wouldn't let me sleep." His confession wasn't just to the police anymore. It was to his guilt, It was to the soul that refused to rest in peace. And for the first time, everyone in that room felt the weight of what true remorse looked like. As dawn broke, the police escorted Arun to the same pond where it had all begun. The water was calm now, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. Villagers gathered behind police tape, their faces filled with disbelief. They had eaten at his house, shared smiles with him, trusted him. And now he stood there in handcuffs, a murderer hidden behind a familiar face. Some cursed his name, others pitied him. But the truth was, no one really knew how to feel, because love, anger, and guilt had all blurred into one unrecognizable tragedy. The trial that followed shook the entire Idukki district. Every hearing revealed new details. The phone records, the messages, the moments leading up to that night. The prosecution painted him as a cold-blooded killer, while his lawyer pleaded for mercy, saying it was a crime of passion. The media called it the Pond Murder Case, and for weeks it was all anyone could talk about. But inside the courtroom, Arun sat motionless, listening to every accusation like a man already sentenced by his own conscience. When the verdict finally came, the silence in the courtroom was louder than any scream. The judge declared him guilty of manslaughter. 20 years in prison. Arun didn't react. No tears, no resistance. Only a quiet nod, as if he had been waiting for someone to say it out loud. That he was guilty not just in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of the woman he had loved and destroyed. Outside the court, rain began to fall again, washing the streets of Idukki like the heavens were trying to cleanse the sin that tainted their quiet town. Months later, villagers said they sometimes saw a faint light near the pond at night, like a candle floating on the water. Some said it was superstition, others believed it was Anita's spirit still searching for peace. The pond became a symbol, not of fear but of consequence. People stopped visiting after sunset, and every time someone mentioned the case, the air grew heavy. The place that once reflected the beauty of the hills now mirrored the darkness that hid in human hearts. In his prison cell, Arun kept a small notebook. Every day he wrote letters to Anita, letters that would never be sent. In them he confessed over and over, begging for forgiveness that might never come. "If only I had walked away," one letter read, "you'd still be smiling somewhere." The warden said he never caused trouble, never spoke much, just stared out of the window whenever it rained. Perhaps he was waiting for the pond's reflection to appear again, to remind him of what he lost, or what he became. And so the case of the Udumbannoor Pond finally came to rest, at least in the files of the police. But for those who had seen it unfold, it was more than just another tragedy. It was a reminder that sometimes monsters aren't strangers hiding in the dark. Sometimes they're people we love, people we think could never hurt us. And as the years went by, villagers would still whisper about that night, asking the same haunting question. Was it really an accident, or did love itself become the weapon that killed Anita?